Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful, creepy human being you, and welcome to today's true crime episode. I am so happy that you are here. I am so happy that somehow in all of this that we're forced to deal with on the day-to-day, today you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or BRATTERSTEIN, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing Janette Tovar, the trans woman who was beaten to death by her boyfriend, and as a result, he simply got probation. But before we get started, if you've not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. Now, before I get into the details of today's case, I first need to say a big thank you to the sponsor of today's video, and that is Aura. Now, I want to start this off with a question for you, and that is this. Have you ever Googled yourself or your loved ones and been surprised to see how much of yours or their personal information was on one of those public listing sites? Because when I tell you, it is far more common for your private and personal information to get leaked out on the internet. And that is because there are these things out there called data brokers who are making money by selling your private information to people you really don't want to have it, like spammers and robocallers. They can even find out where you live. I am not down with that sickness. I value my privacy and I value your privacy. And that's why I want to introduce you to Aura. Now, I've got some good news and I've got some bad news. The good news, data brokers are legally required to take down your information if you ask them to. Sounds great, but here's the twist. They make it super difficult for you to figure out which data brokers have your information. And that is where Aura comes in. They figure out which of those pesky brokers have your information and they submit opt-out requests on your behalf. They do the work so that you do not have to. When I first signed up for Aura, the very first thing I did is I went to the data broker opt-out section, like on their website, which if you sign up, you will see. And I wanted to see like how many of these data brokers really had my information. And it turns out like 30, and Aura had already submitted opt-out requests on my behalf. Thank you, Aura. They also see okay, here's some other stuff they do, for example, like they see if your information's been leaked on the dark web. And if you've ever had that happen, you know, no one wants their information leaked on the dark web. That can cause problems that last for years and years and years that you have to deal with. And they also see if things like your password on websites that you use for important things like your banking are secure, which is something I had always been curious about because I've had the same password since 2007. And it turns out that my passwords were secure, but I know that that's not the case for everyone. And those right there are just a couple of examples of things that Aura does to protect you and your loved ones from online threats that you just simply cannot see. Through just the Aura app, which is super easy to set up, you can get things like parental controls, antivirus, VPN, password management, identity theft insurance, and more. And you get it all in one place. There's no need for several different apps, and you get it all at one affordable price. Now, it sounds like a great deal to me, but listen, I'm not your mom. I can't tell you what to do, but what I can tell you is that I don't want people to exploit and profit off of your personal information, and you don't have to let that happen to you. You can let Aura do the hard work for you by keeping you safe online. And of course, I have great news for you today. Aura is offering members of the Brat Pack the opportunity to explore all they have to offer for free for 2 weeks through my link. So if all that sounds as good to you as it does to me, make sure to click the link in my description box to let them know I'm the one that sent you and get a 14-day free trial and see if your personal information has been leaked online. And if it has, let Aura help you put a stop to it today. Now, I just want to say a big thank you to Aura for partnering with me on today's video. It's partners like Aura that make it possible for me to put out videos as consistently as I do. And a big thank you to you guys for always being so supportive of all of my sponsors. You rock. Don't ever change. All right, with all that said, we can go ahead and get into this video. Now, this video is on a case that's been on my radar for a while, actually. I have a folder, and I've had a folder for Janette's case since 2022 filled with information and photos, and I just hadn't sat down and really, planned it out and made it into a video. But so with last month being Pride Month, I really, sat and reflected a lot, and thought a lot and read a lot and watched a lot of things. And I thought, of course, about how far we've come, but I also thought about how far we need to come. And in being in that mindset and reflecting on everything, it made me start thinking about Janette again. And it made me think that now is the time. Now is the time when I want to talk about her and tell her story, because it is a story that really needs to be told. So with that, today I'm going to tell you the entire story. I read all the things so that you do not have to. And at the end of this video, I'm going to ask you the question of the day. I'm going to give it to you now so you can have it kicking around in your brain as we go through the details of this case. But of course, I want you to answer when you have something to go on. And the question of the day is this. Do you think that Janette's killer, her boyfriend, should have served jail time for her murder? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below after we go through the details of this case. And now, with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of the murder of Janette Tovar. Our story today begins with a 911 call, as many of our stories do, and it was about 4 p.m. on October 15th, 2012, when a man named Jonathan called 911 to report that his girlfriend, Janette Tovar, was unresponsive and not breathing. Dallas Fire and Rescue responded on the scene about 20 minutes later with police, homicide detectives specifically to follow, and unfortunately, Janette was not able to be saved. Now, when police first spoke to Jonathan, he didn't really give them any information that made it clear for police as to he didn't help explain to police why a perfectly healthy 43-year-old woman would just drop dead in his home. She didn't have any prior medical history, nothing like that. So it didn't really make any sense. But as police looked at the scene, started investigating her murder, looked into Janette and her relationship and her life, and talked to those who knew her, it did not take long for an arrest to be made. And when I say not long, I mean literally within days, an arrest was made. And the person arrested was 26-year-old Jonathan Stewart Kenny, Janette's boyfriend, who turns out had beat her to death. Now, before we move forward, I want to talk about Janette because she is the most important person in this case and the person whose story I feel like has sort of gotten lost. Just in the media, there really hasn't been that much reporting. So I want to tell you everything I could learn about her before we move into what happened here and the outcome of this case, which is the most disappointing thing, one of the most disappointing things I've ever heard. So Janette Tovar was born August 31st, and she was born to a large family. She was one of 6 children born to her parents, and she was a bright light in their family. She was the type of person who friends, family members, seemingly every person who came in contact with her loved and was enchanted by her vibrant personality and her infectious smile. As Janette got older, she really seemed to come into her own. She started to figure out who she was, and once she figured that out, she embraced who she was. And as a transgender woman, she flourished truly. And reportedly, quote, there was not a person in the family who didn't love her and accept her for who she was. She was like a mother, a sister, a confidant to so many people. And man, she was so happy. That's something that every single person who talked to her had to say, that she was just a truly, deeply happy person. She was full of life, willing to help anyone she could. She had a warm personality and a giving nature. And her friend Josh said that she loved people and everyone loved her too. Janette was very close with her family. Anytime she had a day off from work, because she worked as a club promoter, she would go and see her family. She spent time with her mother and her nieces, but she was particularly close with her cousin Marissa. I guess from the time that Janette was 20 years old, her and Marissa became inseparable. They'd get together at least 2 times a week to go and hang out and get drinks at this place called the Grapevine Bar on Maple Avenue, which was, quote, Dallas's everybody dive bar, from prom queens to drag queens, and was one of Janette's favorite places because she felt loved and seen and accepted, and actually worked there as a promoter and a bar back. This is a place where Janette had made a lot of friends, not just her coworkers, but also patrons, and even random workers who would come in and do things for the bar. For example, there was this guy named Wayne who came in and started doing work there because there was a remodel in part of the bar, and him and Janette became close friends very quickly. He said from the moment he met, he could tell that she was funny and she was kind. She was even the type of person who went out of her way and did things that wasn't her job. She would go around, but she was not working, and pick up classes to be helpful for the staff. And he said specifically of her, quote, she saw it needed done and she'd do it. She was nice to everybody. She was a friend to everybody. She was just kind, with a positive presence and just this energy, right? She was the type of person, she had a signature hair flip, which I think is precious, just a signature hair flip that usually accompanied some sort of exclamation like, hey mama, or I got you girl. She was just truly loved, and she is truly missed. Her cousin Marissa, who again was her best friend, and since her murder has been her biggest and loudest advocate, said that the two were just so close, right? So losing her was such a blow because they were like shadows to one another. Marissa was probably the closest person to Janette. Well, Marissa and Jonathan. So Jonathan wasn't Janette's first boyfriend. She had dated other people and had her share of, quote, troubled relationships. But with Jonathan, it was different. They were said to just be a good match and really seemed to love each other. They were the type of couple that other people aspired to be like. And it just seemed that Jonathan was really good at turning it on and turning it off. But more importantly, turning it on when other people were around. Because one of Janette's friends, I forget their name at this point, but one of Janette's friends who had known Janette a long time, but moved before she got with Jonathan, like moved out of state, had come back to visit and had met him. And though this friend had heard rumors that Jonathan might, not be the nicest guy, as particularly to Janette, when they met him, they had trouble believing this was true because apparently he was just like Prince Charming, a total gentleman. At the time that Janette was killed, her and Jonathan had been together a little over a year, and they had just recently moved in together. So from the outside, it seemed like things were going in the right direction. But those who knew Janette more intimately knew that that wasn't exactly the case, because they knew that the two fought a lot. And people would see them argue, like people close to her would see them argue, though nobody actually saw him be physically violent with her, but they did hear stories from Janette about how he was physically abusive. And it wasn't just that. After she was killed during her autopsy, they noted that she had cuts and bruises, like older cuts and bruises on her arms that seemed to be from other, quote, violent encounters. So, the night before Janette was killed, her and Jonathan were out on the town. It was the weekend. They were having a good time. But reportedly, Jonathan drank a little more than he typically did. And though when he drank, he was sometimes known to be belligerent, he was that kind of drunk, this time he was also a bit aggressive. So that night, the two were at the Grapevine bar when they started to fight. And the fight between the two of them ended up getting so bad that Janette left. She was like, fuck this noise. And she went out with friends. But eventually she had to go and meet back up with Jonathan. They did, come together. They lived together. But before she left her friends, she told them, like, if you don't hear from me, I'm probably dead. Which is an incredibly cryptic thing for her to say, and something to note, and something that her cousin Marissa says that people should take notice of, because though this was just like a thing that felt like it was said just secondhand flippantly, like it wasn't important, these are the things that you should listen to. And she just wishes that prior to Janette being killed, she knew just how bad the abuse against her was, so she knew how serious this statement was. Because, she did meet up with Jonathan that night, and now she's gone. According to his arrest affidavit, Jonathan admitted to slamming her head into a concrete wall located in the 830 block of West Davis Street, a few blocks from their home at 6:20 in the morning. That was on a Monday. And that once the two got back to their home, which was located at 918 West 8th Street, he continued to assault her, and he admitted to all of this. But not initially. Prior to admitting this, prior to finally telling police the truth, he was out while police were investigating, and he made sure to put a post on Facebook about how much he loved Janette and how her being gone was so horrible. Like, you know the post when somebody dies that you see. But of course he didn't mention in this post that he was responsible for doing it. But he said in this post, quote, "I love you, my baby Janette. You're my love, my everything, and I will miss you so much. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, girl. Kisses. I hope you can see me down here, even though I can't see you. I feel your spirit still living with me. Rest in peace, mi amor. Mi vida." His love, his life, who he beat to death and then waited to call the cops or get her any help until she was beyond help. But okay. It's just very frustrating to me, especially because in doing the investigation, police were able to determine that, this wasn't an isolated incident. He was oftentimes violent with Janette. Police checked with neighbors, and one of the neighbors they spoke with was the property manager, the on-site property manager, who incidentally lived right below Janette and Jonathan, and told police, these two fought all the time. They were always fighting. They were always arguing, and even the night, the morning, back up. They were out Sunday night partying. They get home in the early morning hours after he assaulted her in the street, went home and continued to assault her. And the manager said that they heard this between 8 and 9 that morning. The manager heard them fighting and heard Janette scream at Jonathan to get off her. Anyways, Janette had an autopsy done, obviously. And I already mentioned that they found those marks on her arms, but the Dallas County Medical Examiner's Office determined that her manner of death was homicide and her cause of death was listed as blunt force trauma to the head. Now, even though Jonathan had provided a taped confession to police, that Monday, the day that the police were called, not on the scene, because remember on the scene, he's like, I have no idea what happened. But later that day, he did provide a taped confession, right? Where he admitted to slamming her head into the wall and to beating her after they got home. Even though that was true, an arrest warrant wasn't actually issued until after the medical examiner's report came out. So he was arrested that Thursday, so a couple of days later. And you know another thing that's super annoying to me about this case, super frustrating? There are so many things about this case that I found to be so frustrating. But in addition to police waiting to arrest him, even though he had admitted to being irresponsible, they also referred to Janette as her birth name. Like the police and the media referred to her as her dead name because they said that they didn't realize she was transgender. And so they just used her legal name in all of the documents because like that's normal procedure if you don't know the person's transgender. To which I say, like, if you were to look at her, it's very clear that she's a woman and like she had been out as being a trans woman for the last 20 years and had been very accepted by her family and friends, by the way. And it's just like so clear that she was living her life as the woman that she was. And it just felt like the type of thing that was disrespectful and like dismissive. But anyways, back to the case. Jonathan, he was arrested. He was indicted on murder charges and he was being held on a $500,000 bond, which is great, obviously. Meanwhile, Janette's friends and family just had to deal with the fact that she was gone and that she was gone in such a horrible way. There was a Facebook page made in her memory. I believe it was her niece who actually went and made this Facebook page, and they posted, you know, photos of her and updates about the case and just information about her. And it's actually still up, by the way. That's how I was able to like learn more about her and to look at her and see how lively and loved she was and how many friends she had. This girl had so many friends. Her friend Freddie, who she had met when she was just 16 years old, like literal children, who he actually said that they ended up practically raising each other because they were around each other so much, said that he hopes that her murder sheds a light on the abuse that transgender human beings experience and also sheds a light on domestic abuse. And he said specifically, quote, "We don't want this to be brushed under the rug. People need to know that there's still abuse out there, no matter if you're a man or a woman." Another friend, Joe, just said he could not accept that she was actually gone and just sat there for a while expecting her to just call him up for a laugh. But she was gone. So instead of, you know, getting that call to laugh with her, her friends and family had to organize and attend a candlelit vigil in her honor. And this was held at the Grapevine Bar, again, a place that she loved and a place that she spent part of her last night. And there were so many people there. I think there were like 200 people who were just stunned and shocked and angry at what happened and how it happened. And they were asked to bring any photos of Janette they had to show everyone so that everybody could sit back and remember her. Now, I don't believe Janette actually ever had a funeral. I know there was no wake or no viewing because she was cremated, but they did have some sort of service at the White Rock Community Church, which was an, quote, open and affirming church that accepts and welcomes all who desire a relationship with Jesus. Now, back to Jonathan. You remember how I told you he was indicted on murder charges and was given a bond of $500,000. Well, that would change. And it was devastating for her family because it was like one blow after another after another. So first what happened is Jonathan was successful at getting his bond reduced from $500,000 to $50,000. That's it. $50,000. And he was able to make that just 2 months after being arrested. He made that bail and he was released, which is such a slap in the face to her family. But then you add the fact that his charges were changed. He went from being indicted on murder charges to being re-indicted on aggravated assault causing serious bodily injury. That was the charge. This was still a first-degree felony, and the prosecutors were combining it with family violence. But if convicted, his sentence would be way, way different than if he had been charged and found guilty of murder. Sorry, there's something in my hair. What is happening? According to the Texas Penal Code, if he was found guilty of this, he could be sentenced to as little as 5 years to life and pay just a $10,000 fine. Can you imagine being her family? And I cannot imagine how they must have been feeling and how just like worthless they must have felt. Not that they were worthless, but that the court system was seeing Janette as worthless. If they're saying that like her life and what he did to her was worth this amount of time, especially when initially they did indict him on murder. It's just, I can't imagine being in their shoes. Now, Janette's family was worried. They were worried because time was marching on and justice wasn't being served. And specifically, her cousin Marissa was worried that he wasn't going to serve enough time, because at this point, they already knew that even if he was found guilty, the amount of time he was going to serve was going to be laughable. But she was also starting to worry that his confession about what happened during the fight between him and Janette wasn't going to be enough to actually get him convicted. She spoke to investigators on Janette's case constantly, and it was making her feel very uncomfortable because her case had gone through 4 different prosecutors in the time it took for it to go to trial. And she knew for a fact that they were having trouble getting witnesses who saw the initial attack in the street where he slammed her head into the wall. They were having trouble getting these witnesses to speak. There was one specific person who has not been named who actually saw, like physically saw, it wasn't like hearsay, it was nothing, saw Jonathan slam Janette's head into the wall. But this person was refusing to come forward and talk to police. Now, Marissa says the reason that this person was refusing to talk was because they were engaged and they were not supposed to be out that night with friends, which I don't know what was going on and they would have gotten in trouble for it. But this person was worried that if they had come out and admitted that they were out with Janette and all the friends that night, that they could get in trouble in their relationship and their relationship might end. So that's why they didn't want to come forward and talk. Well, that, and Marissa says the fact that this person didn't want to be involved in a murder investigation, particularly a murder of a trans woman. Regardless, though, they needed it. They needed this person's testimony. They needed this person to come forward and say what they saw to make sure that the case was strong enough at trial. And time was marching on. They were getting closer and closer to the date of the trial. So, like, what would happen if they didn't find her? And even if they did find her, she was like an unwilling witness. How would that look at trial? They were basically hoping for a miracle here. Like, of course, police could subpoena her and other friends, but they had to find this person, especially since most of the people that knew about the violence between Janette and Jonathan hadn't actually seen anything. They had just heard the things that she told them, so that would be hearsay. So her family's nervous. They're upset. Marissa is real upset. She seems pissed off, honestly, because she's like, how could this person who says that they're friends with Janette be okay with potentially letting her murderer get away with what he did to her? And she said specifically of this quote, "There's something very selfish about every one of these people who called themselves friends and associates not coming forward. In a way, they're trying to play judge and jury, thinking that people won't care about the truth." She said that the idea that Jonathan may not pay for what he did to Janette was unbearable because he had ripped her favorite person away from this world. So they were just feeling really desperate. And what's super fucked up here is she had every reason to be worried because she was right. Her biggest fear and the biggest fear from Janette's community came true. Nearly 3 years after Janette was murdered, it was confirmed that Jonathan was going to be taking a plea deal. And he was going to plead guilty to the aggravated assault charge, which, you know, is a felony. But it went from being indicted on murder charges to being indicted on aggravated assault charges, which came with significantly less jail time. And now, even less jail time with a plea deal. And it's just so upsetting because her family had no idea why they made this deal. Like, it might even be to this day. I know for years after, her family had no idea why this deal was made, had never seen the case file, had never gotten to see, like, read or hear what Jonathan had said to see if, like, what he said made sense as to why the prosecution would agree to make this deal. Marissa said that in the beginning, the prosecutors were communicative, and eventually, though, they stopped as the case switched hands over and over, and they just don't understand and assumed that they were being treated the way they were and the case was being treated like it was because Janette was transgender and there was a bias. And that, like, they just cared less about her. Is this true? I can't say, but this is the impression they were giving the family with the way they were treating the family. So it was announced that he was going to be making a plea deal, but the specifics of that deal were going to be revealed at the hearing and the trial, which was scheduled for October 1st, 2015. But this ended up being moved up several weeks. And Marissa believes that the reason the trial got moved up so fast is because she, ever since learning that there was going to be a plea deal, had been speaking out about it constantly. She had even came out and publicly spoke about the terms of the deal during the vigil for another Dallas trans woman. Her name was Shade Schuler, Miss Shade, as people called her, who was killed, which is a very sad case, which to this day remains unsolved. The vigil was held at dusk in Oak Lawn's Reversion Park? Reverchon Park. Many people came out and spoke about Shade, or spoke about how they had been affected by violence against trans human beings. And there was a lot of people there to talk, because at this time when this vigil was held, there had already been 19 murders of trans human beings in the US, with 2 of them being in Texas. Marissa spoke at this vigil, and at the time that this vigil took place, the time that she spoke, she had just learned about Jonathan's deal, so it was very raw for her, and she said it felt like the ultimate smack in the face. She was so devastated by this that at one point during the ceremony, while she's trying to give her speech, she was like unable to compose herself and had to be held up at the podium. But she did stay there. She did stand up, and she said, quote, "They were beautiful flowers that were meant to be shared by the world, and now their seeds are watered by the tears of the loved ones they leave behind. But maybe, just maybe, this is a time when we're going to get to see a change, so that future generations of transgender women don't have to suffer through the abuse and neglect from the legal system when they're in trouble, and especially when they're murdered." But in this case, that is exactly what happened. Janette was absolutely failed by the legal system, because the deal that Jonathan got to make for killing her is wild. In exchange for his guilty plea, he was sentenced to 10 years of deferred adjudication, which is a type of probation in which a judge can still sentence him to life in prison if he violates the terms of the probation. If he does violate his probation, he could be sent to prison for 5 to 99 years. But as long as he does not violate this probation, he'll have nothing on his record. He won't even have a conviction on his record. Oh, but wait, there is more. He does have to pay a $2,500 fine as well. He basically did 2 months of jail time, bonded out, and that was it. That's the only jail time he served for what he did to Janette. And if you're wondering why there weren't any special enhancements, because she was transgender, that's because of the fact that the motivation for the murder wasn't, hating trans people or being against trans people. They were in a relationship. Not to say that that means that somebody in a relationship with a trans person couldn't also hate them, because that is a thing, but in this case it was just seen as simple domestic violence. And actually not even just that, because the DA, not the defense, the DA implied that Janette may have started the fight or even been the aggressor, which is pretty rich considering we're just taking the person who killed her side of the story, it seems. But now, obviously, as I'm sure you can imagine, people were enraged to the point that the DA had to put out a statement sort of explaining themselves. It was like a virtual thing, like an email typed up, but they said specifically, quote, "In a tragic case like this one, plea agreements are always difficult. We base plea decisions on the evidence available in any specific case and an overriding desire for justice for both victims and those charged with crimes. Our thoughts and prayers are with the Tovar family at this time." But obviously, this was not good enough for her family, with her cousin Marissa even saying, like, there is not a person alive who can look at the outcome of this case and be like, you know what? Yeah, that's justice. Many people after this decision was made came out and spoke about it and looked into it and tried to understand how this could be the case, because it is not something that happens often. It's not unheard of. It has happened before, but it is very rare in cases of murder for somebody to just get probation, especially when it goes against the victim's family's wishes. A former judge even came out and was like, listen, I can look at this and see how from a legal perspective they thought this was the right thing to do. But what happens in these cases is that people lose the moral point of view and don't think about whether or not this is the right thing to do morally. A woman named Pam Curry, who was a trans activist, was able to speak to the judge who handled this case, making sure to let the judge know that the leniency in this case was very concerning to the community which she represented. Okay. And in speaking to the judge, she was able to sort of see what their mindset was and their decision-making process a little bit. The judge, who was reportedly pretty condescending and even referred to Janette as her dead name, said that Janette had the opportunity to get help but refused EMT transportation to the hospital, which could have caused reasonable doubt in a jury as to whether her death was actually Jonathan's fault. And another thing was the fact that she had cocaine in her system. So the judge said that this case seemed like it could have been a losing case and that there was a good chance that Jonathan would have been acquitted. The judge said that though probation seems light, a sentence of 10 years of probation is not as easy and just basically not as easy as it seems. Number one, is that he can't appeal this. He cannot appeal this decision because he admitted to the assault, which I don't know why he would appeal it considering this is such a light sentence. He says it's not light, but it kind of seems like it's light. Would you really want to roll the dice on like getting a new trial or something when you literally got no jail time? I don't know. But the judge said the second reason that it is difficult is that 10 years probation is really tough for a person. Like it's tough for a person not to slip up and get themselves in trouble when they are a known drug addict and have a propensity for violence, which I found to be interesting because their court obviously knew something that wasn't put into the media by calling him a drug addict, right? And said that there is going to be alcohol and drug testing as part of his probation. And if he slips up at all, he could go back to jail for a long, long time. So this is how the judge is justifying that this isn't like as light of a sentence as it seems. Now, Janette's family, they didn't care about what the judge said, and they expressed their outrage at the plea deal by wearing t-shirts dedicated to Janette and made signs. One of the signs that they carried said, quote, "The world is watching," all while her broken mother held a black box filled with her ashes, one of the only things they had left of Janette. Now, during Jonathan's sentencing, Janette's mother, Delphina, did take the stand to speak. She had a Spanish translator so that she could speak to him, and it was hard for her. Like, she got there, and she hung her head, and she, like, opened her mouth to speak a couple of times, but was unable to, like, get herself together to speak. But when she finally did, she said to Jonathan through the translator, quote, "I see your face after 3 years. I am the mom of Janette. I don't think 10 years probation is justice." From there, she got more and more upset. Her emotions really got the best of her, which I'm surprised we don't see this more often because I feel like I would be exactly like this. And she just started screaming at him in Spanish. Like, she didn't care if it was understood by the court. She just needed it to be said. And the translator did their best to keep up with her. She was like, fuck it, I'm not waiting for this translator. I am just getting this all out. And the translator would just put in bits and pieces that they got where she said things like, quote, "Why did you do this? What kind of person are you? God may forgive you, but I never will." Once she had let all of that out, she was helped down from the witness stand where she went back to her seat and just clung to a photo of her daughter. Marissa said that the sentence of probation in this case was unprecedented in its leniency. During the sentencing hearing, she told the court that all the life and color that was Janette is just gray, and now that could pour through her hands, adding that it was as cold as her heart had become. And I didn't even mention this, but she was dealing with all of this while battling cancer. Okay? And I can't say for sure that she's cancer-free because, like, I don't know her. But what I can say that it's been 10 years at this point, more than 10 years, and she's still alive. So that is amazing. I'm so, when I heard that she had cancer, I was like, fuck, dude. But she's still alive. And that's just amazing to see. And anyways, back to when she was giving her victim impact statement, she said that she was so sad and so outraged. And through all of this guy who supposedly loved her and must have said that this was an accident. Like they never put out what he said, but he had to have claimed that this wasn't on purpose. Otherwise, I don't think he would have gotten this deal. And if that was the case, you would have thought that he cared, right? You would think that hearing all these people talk about how much they loved her, if he really did too, that he would have been affected. But the whole time he just sat there quietly and said nothing. And that was that, because I've looked into it and I've looked into him and there are no updates on him, like nothing that says he went back to jail. So by this time, since it's been more than 10 years, his probation should just be over. And he was 29, I think, when he was sentenced. So he's like 40 and he's just presumably out there living his life like nothing ever happened. Now, I have seen it pointed out in news articles that I read that though Janette's case is incredibly tragic, because obviously it is, and though it was looking like there wasn't going to be any sort of repercussions for her killer, there at least was, even if it was basically nothing. There was something done here, because in the mass majority of trans murder cases, they go unsolved, completely unsolved, and oftentimes just like uninvestigated. But that does not mean that victims are not remembered and they are not honored, because starting in 1999, there is something called the Transgender Day of Remembrance. And it actually started, the very first one was to remember a woman named Rita Hessler. She was a trans woman who was murdered, she's 25 years ago now. And to this day, her case still isn't solved. She was a trans activist who lived in Boston, and on November 28th, 1998, she was attacked in her own apartment and stabbed 20 times. A neighbor called police and Rita was rushed to the hospital, but she died shortly after being admitted. And again, to this day, her case has not been solved. Her murderer is just, we don't know. It's been a long time. They could be gone, but they got away with it is the point. So clearly there is just a larger issue at play here. Cases like this happen all the time. They just happen, and we don't hear about them enough. I remember, I think it was last year, I covered the case of Malaysia Booker. It might have been 2 years ago now. And during that case, because that was a case out of Dallas of a transgender woman who was murdered, there were so many other transgender women murdered in the same area around that time that they thought there might even be a serial killer. But it turns out, from what I've looked into, that wasn't the case. There's just a lot of violence that happens against transgender human beings, particularly in Dallas, which is crazy, but I discussed this before. And speaking of which, because of Janette's case, the representatives of the Dallas Gay and Lesbian Alliance had a meeting with DA Susan Hawk. And as a result of this meeting, they added a transgender person to her office's LGBT task force, which, could be performative. It feels performative, but at least it's a step in the right direction. This is just such a tragic case of a woman who really seemed to be a light to so many people that was taken from this world way too soon. And I think Marissa is totally right when she says that no one can look at this case, see a person murdered, see a woman murdered, and see that her killer was given just probation and think that that was justice. Because simply put, it was not. And with that, my friends, is the story of the murder of Janette Tovar. I hope that you found my telling of this to be informative. I hope I gave you all the information you would want when looking into this case. And of course, I just want to thank you for remembering Janette with me today. Now, considering everything I told you throughout this video, I want to revisit the question of the day, and that was this. Do you think that Jonathan should have served jail time for Janette's murder, or do you think that probation was sufficient? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below, because I'm curious to see what you say. Anyways, guys, before you leave, don't forget to leave me a comment down below with whatever case you'd like to see me cover in the future. As you know, I have a long list of cases. This is one from the list, but whenever you leave me a suggestion, I put it on my list so that if I do cover it, I can give you a shout out. I love looking into the cases you guys suggest, because they're often cases I haven't heard of or cases that need more coverage. And I know you're filled with great ideas and great taste. Otherwise, you would not be here. Before you leave, if you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing the bell. I put out a video every single week, sometimes 2 a week. And I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us. One of us. One of us. Us. And if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is listed down below, along with a link to my membership and a link to my merch store. I'm sorry if I seem so out of it. This is what I'm moving in like less than a week. This is one of the last videos I'm filming in this space. I might get one more done. Probably not, but I'm going to try. So if I'm out of it, I'm tired. I'm tired, but I'm trying. Tired, but trying. Put that on a t-shirt. But anyways, with all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here. When you could literally be anywhere else in the world, that is tight. You, specifically you, are tight. And thank you for being here. And I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.